Breaking news, unanswered questions about the largest private bank in Russia and the Trump Organization and why President Trump made those wiretapping accusations. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Sources tell CNN there's a federal investigation into a, quote, odd computer server relationship between the Trump Organization and a Russian bank. Could it be the root of President Trump's infamous wiretapping accusations against President Barack Obama? That's as FBI Director James Comey meets today with members of Congress with top security access. Members tight-lipped about what was discussed, but it comes as they conduct their own investigation of Russia, the election, and President Trump's wiretapping claims. We have a whole lot to get to, but I want to start with our breaking news right now. CNN's justice correspondent is Pamela Brown, and she's looking into all of it for us. Pamela, what have you learned about the investigation?
Well, Don, we've learned FBI investigators and computer scientists continue to examine whether there was a computer connection between the Trump Organization and a Russian bank called Alfa Bank, according to several sources familiar with this investigation. Now, this is the same server mentioned in a Breitbart article that a White House official said sparked President Trump's series of tweets last Saturday accusing investigators of tapping his phone. CNN is told there was no FISA warrant on this particular server, but questions about the connection between the server and the Russian bank were widely dismissed 4 months ago as an attempt by Alfa Bank to block spam. But we have learned that the FBI's counterintelligence team, the same one looking into Russia's suspected interference in the 2016 election, is still examining it. And one official I spoke with said the server relation is seen as somewhat odd and perplexing, and investigators are not ignoring it. But the FBI still has a lot more work to do to determine what was behind the unusual activity and whether there's any significance to it. The FBI declined to comment, and the White House did not respond to our request for a comment. Don?
All right, Pamela Brown starting us off tonight. Thank you very much for that. Now I want to bring in CNN Money investigative reporter Jose Palieri. Jose, explain what was so odd about these communications.
Now, this is a highly technical subject, so I'm going to take it very slow. What's odd about these communications is that a Russian bank repeatedly looked up the unique internet address of a particular server in the United States used by the Trump Organization. In the computer world, this is equivalent to someone looking up someone's phone number over and over again. It's pretty innocuous. While there isn't necessarily a phone call, it usually indicates an intention to communicate. That's according to several computer scientists we spoke to. Now, a particular group of computer scientists who obtained these internet records that were leaked, records that were never supposed to be made public, they were puzzled as to why a Russian bank was doing this. Was it trying to send an email to the Trump Organization? These scientists just couldn't tell. Now, last summer, during the presidential campaign, the Russian bank looked up the address of this Trump corporate server some 2,800 times. That's more lookups than the Trump server received from any other source. The only other entity doing so many internet lookups was a server that was used by Spectrum Health. That's a medical facility chain led by Dick DeVos, the husband of Betsy DeVos, who was later appointed by the president as U.S. Education Secretary. Those two entities alone made up 99% of these lookups. Now, computer scientists we spoke to found that just plain weird. They couldn't explain it, they just thought it was weird. So all the corporations involved say they never communicated by email with the Trump Organization, and they have different competing explanations for that server activity. But they haven't provided proof that backs that up, and they don't agree with what the explanation could be. For example, the Russian bank thinks it was receiving Trump Hotel email marketing last summer, but it hasn't provided CNN with a single email during that time period to back it up. Meanwhile, the American marketing company that would have been sending these emails from the Trump Organization said it wasn't doing it at the time. We have to make clear that Alfa Bank at this point has stressed that none of its top executives have had any affiliation at all with President Trump or the Trump Organization. In a statement, they said that neither Alfa Bank nor its principals, including Mikhail Friedman or Peter Aven, have had any contact at all with Mr. Trump or his organizations. So, in essence, what we still have is an ongoing mystery.
It is an ongoing mystery. And Jose, I want you to stand by because let's dig into this a little bit more. I want to bring in now Rod Beckstrom. He's a former director of National Cybersecurity Center. Rod, thank you so much for joining us here. So you heard what Pamela and Jose just reported. Sources are telling them that this server activity is, quote, odd. What do you make of that? What does that mean?
They're right. It is odd. It's just not very conventional behavior here, Don. I mean, to have 2,800 lookups for something, I mean, what was going on? It certainly suggests that there was an intent to communicate between those two parties. And I really don't buy the spam explanation, and here's why. if the Trump Hotel was sending out spam campaign, it would be going out globally to thousands and thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands. The argument that Trend Micro, which is an antivirus product, sort of like McAfee or Symantec, et cetera, that it was detecting these and then doing a lookup to determine whether it was valid email or not coming in, or whether it was what we call a phishing attack. If that were true, Don, then that would have happened from all over the world, from everyone else that received that spam that had Trend Micro installed and configured in the same way.
Rod,
but it didn't happen.
Rod, what is a lookup? Explain to me and to the folks at home, what exactly is a lookup?
Sure. There's different kinds, and I don't have enough technical details here to know exactly which one, but the normal DNS query is if you're at your browser and you type in CNN.com and you hit return, that sends what we call a simple DNS lookup query to the domain name system, and the domain name system is supposed to respond and say, well, the IP address for CNN.com is ... a long set of numbers, like 12 numbers with a bunch of periods in the middle of it for IPv4. So that's a simple lookup. What's not clear to me here is whether it was that simple of a lookup, and that is done, by the way, to fetch a web page or to send an email. So if I send an email to you, Don, at your CNN.com email address, that generally would generate maybe 10, maybe even 13 what we call DNS lookups. So anyway, it suggests communication between Alpha Bank and the server of the Trump Organization. The next thing I want to point out is note the quote by the Alpha Bank leadership that the principals and the executive leaders have no relationship with the Trump Organization. They're not saying our staff doesn't, our employees or our contractors or consultants. And they might be trying to distance themselves, potentially, from something that they might feel took place. I don't know.
Interesting.
And that's pure speculation.
I want to bring Jose back into this part of his reporting. So these lookups, talk to me more about these lookups. Does that suggest anything nefarious, or you just don't really?
No, not necessarily, because the way that this DNS system works on the internet, it's sort of like the internet's phone book, right? So if somebody
does it suggest hack, that they were maybe trying to hack into the Trump Organization?
It could. It's the reason that someone would look up someone's phone number. Think about it in real life, right? If I looked up your phone number 1,000, 2,000, 2,800 times, you'd probably wonder, why are you looking at my phone number?
Right,
are you
exactly.
trying to contact me? Do you just want to know who I am? What's going on? And so that's what we have here. It's just lookups. What these scientists have said over and over again is they can't explain this. They just want someone to investigate. They want the FBI, they want someone to look into this and figure out why was this bank server doing all these lookups.
So Rod, my question to you is, if you were looking into server activity involving the Trump Organization and the Russian bank, what would you be looking for?
Well, what you really want to get a hold of is the data packets, okay? But the reality is, if this was any kind of Russian intelligence operation, you got to bet those packets were encrypted. So even if you got the packets, well, you could at least see, well, they went from Alpha Bank and they landed up over here and they're encrypted. So then you know there was a data flow. No one has asserted that I've heard of, Don. That hasn't been in the story yet. So, but that's what you'd be looking for. Well, you'd want to see data traffic. And I also want to comment, the DNS system is very open, and that means that lookup or that query goes through open servers and passes through a lot of wires between Moscow and Pennsylvania, and a lot of parties can be listening in. It's legal and valid to keep a record of DNS queries. So major internet operators have huge logs or record books of these lookups that have been done, and some of these parties, it seems like, have started to share data and have raised these questions about what exactly was going on here.
Odd, to say the least, as you guys explained it. Okay, gentlemen, stand by. I want to discuss this now with Russia expert Matthew Rojansky, the director of the Kennan Institute at the Wilson Center, CNN legal analyst Laura Coates, and CNN national security analyst Steve Hall. So we have a lot to go through here. Steve, I'm going to start with you. What's your reaction to Pamela and Jose's reporting? Take us behind what you think the counterintelligence team is looking for.
Well, first, you do have this anomalous data exchange, this electronic handshake, for lack of a better, for philosophy majors like me, who don't understand all the technical piece of it. But the important thing is that it has raised to the level, to the attention of the FBI and those focusing on the possible cooperation or possible contact between the Trump camp and the Russians. So that in and of itself is significant. I think another thing that's significant is to remember the role that Alpha Bank plays. So Alpha Bank, you got to remember, in Russia, there is no rule of law. There's no protection over banks. Basically, Alpha Bank is an extension of Vladimir Putin. If Vladimir Putin reaches out and tells the head of Alpha Bank, Mr. Friedman, that, look, you've got to do X, Y, or Z. He's going to do it because he works inside the Russian system and stands a lot to lose if he doesn't do it. So that's important to remember as well. Exactly what the nature of the communication is and what's actually going on, I think has yet to be determined. There's a lot more stuff that needs to be dug up first.
When you said Alpha Bank is essentially Vladimir Putin, I looked right at Matthew Rojansky to see. I mean, explain that. Is he right about that?
I'm not totally sure that if Vladimir Putin so first of all, we have to see what the evidence supports in the end, and that requires an investigation. That's kind of where we are on almost all of these contacts at this point. We can't prejudge until we know exactly what the evidence is going to support. Second, I would say if Vladimir Putin was mounting any kind of attempt to covertly communicate with Trump or the Trump organization or the Trump campaign, the Russians have plenty of assets that don't have a giant Russian name on the front of them and billions of dollars of Russian assets and servers located in Russia.
So you're saying it wouldn't be this easy to find?
It seems like if that's what they were doing, then they want to be found, and why would they want to be found if those were the kind of contacts?
Right. One of the things that really jumps out at me here is that this is not how you would communicate secretly. It's just not how you do it. You want to communicate secretly, you open up an email address, right? An email account, you share a password, and you write in the drafts.
Yeah.
Right? That's the old school way to do it.
Let's bring my former federal prosecutor here, Laura. As you're listening to this story, what do you think?
Well, I'm thinking that the unanswered questions we're all wrestling with right now are the very reason why the FBI is investigating. Right now, we don't know whether these communications fall under the hacking, the benign, or some other malicious content now. So we have to figure out whether or not we're opening Pandora's box or going to a dead end. But the real issue here, and what's very timely, is the fact that we now have confirmation hearings underway for a deputy attorney general who's going to have to oversee this, because clearly any investigation into Russian contacts with the Trump administration or the Trump campaign is but the tip of an iceberg. And while we continue on this path, we need to know that anyone who's going to oversee the investigation is going to have to be completely separated from the campaign, which is why Sessions' recusal was so necessary. What we're finding now, however, is that all these unanswered questions solidifies in my mind and the Congress's mind as to why we need somebody to oversee the investigation who is truly, truly distinct. Now, at this point in time, our investigation is, or not our, the FBI's investigation is trying to figure out whether or not this falls into three categories. Whether or not this is somebody contacting the Trump server to try to have a spam, counteracting spam, which you've already heard is kind of being debunked. Whether this is somebody who is simply trying to transfer data in some way, or this is something different than that, or this is, or if the Trump server in fact communicated in return. So we have to kind of take a step back here and say, listen, right now it's in the infancy stage. But again, that combined with other things that are in the infancy stage raises a whole lot more questions, and there's a great deal of smoke.
Yeah. Okay, panel, I want you all to stay with me. We're going to continue our conversation. And what is the White House saying about all of this? We'll be right back.